we're going to introduce Mr. Grant Abbott on stage. Off you go, mate.
I don't know, that blew me away. I think it's fantastic to, being an entrepreneur myself, to see someone take it so high. But at the end of the day, it all does come down to sales, really, at the end of the, when we're looking at it. But more importantly, it's also what the frame is. Most of you know that, I used to do SMSFs and now family wealth protection. I think the key there is, if you're framing it up, if you're doing an estate planning or family wealth protection, tell the client that you're doing that. You're not doing the accounting stuff, because otherwise they're seeing you at a different element. A couple of things that happened today. AI dropped its new version 4.0, which is for Omni. I don't know if you've seen it, but definitely go and have a look at it, because it's a game changer in terms of teaching, sales, customer support. You actually got something that's talking back to you in real time, understanding you in real time. I've built a new tool which I'm not sure if we're going to have time to develop, but essentially you'll be able to ask it questions. It's based on the law in my book around self-managed superannuation funds. It'll give you a really detailed response, all the steps you need to do it and all of that. And again, it's something that you just can't see anywhere else in the market. So it's very exciting. And then we go from that high, and then we've got the budget tonight, and it's like, oh my God, what's going to be in there? So when we first started doing this idea of this unstoppable growth, the first person I wanted to always have talking is Andrew Inwood from Core Data. Andrew is easily, and I've been around a lot of people, easily the smartest person I know. I've known him for about 20 years. He can cite economic history or history from, like 2,000 years ago. He's built a global data analysis network throughout all the world, has huge amounts of staff, does travelling everywhere. And one of the ones I said, oh, Andrew, would you come and speak? I said, I'd like to, have you got any data in relation to baby boomers retiring and wealth transferring over the next 20 or 30 years? He said, yeah, absolutely. But before he was doing that, I said, look, why don't you give us a bit of an analysis of where the Australian economy is going? What's your view? A bit on the global economy as well, before we dive into that great pot of money, which is the baby boom, not retirement anymore because they're all retired, the great baby boom death and where that money is ending up going. So Andrew Inwood from Core Data, see if you'd like to welcome him to the stage.
Thanks, Grant. That's just about the worst invitation I've ever had, the smartest person in the room. It's something I'd rather not be. So I'd try and not to be as invisible as possible, which is not a great characteristic for someone who runs a company. What I want to talk about today is a couple of things. One is that the macroeconomic settings are changing. One of the really worrying things that the current Treasurer has been saying is that he wants to reinvent capitalism, and he's going to try and do that with this budget. In the history of the world, that's never worked. So I don't understand why it's going to work this time, and I think he's smoking something that maybe the rest of us don't have access to. But that's okay, because the people in this room are going to be the net benefiters of that. As confusion increases and as the ability to, for want of a better phrase, hide wealth decreases, then people are going to rely more and more on your services. I'm going to cut through kind of four things today: the kind of $4.9 trillion economic transfer, talking to other children's people about money, which is going to be really important, 3 models of success and 5 things to think about right now. So Core Data is global. We've been around for 22 years. We've got, as we speak, about 110 people working around the industry. The fastest growing group in our business, to Grant's point earlier, is the IT team that we've been working on. There's about 22 people on that team now, based out of San Francisco, because without being rude about it, the best thinkers aren't in Australia working on this space. We've been working on large language models, which is what ChatGPT is, for the last 7 years, and we were pretty annoyed a few years ago when people started making it common of what was going on, and it had left the academic journals and had come into the world of everybody else. So we kind of lost our advantage as these things became more common. The rest of the world are kind of sales engines, focusing into the market and understanding what's going on. The thing that we think is really important is that systems are relatively easy to understand and people are unbelievably complex. Most people are bored, annoyed and distracted. Even when they're running giant organisations, that's how they face into the world. Very few people have the crispness and the clarity of thought of Simon Beard. Most people are just getting through the process. There's a really interesting book about that by a man called Richard Thaler, called Nudge, if you want to read it. I want to talk about the zeitgeist right now. Zeitgeist is a German word. One of my hobbies is learning other languages, and I'm a pretty good German speaker. It means time ghost or spirit of the times. But the Germans do this thing where they have things called portmanteau words, where they push words together to give them new meanings. Gave them an enormous advantage in the early 19th century because the French, who were then leading the chemical industry, decided that the French language was full and we're going to have no more new words. That was it. The Académie Française says no more. So the French, being smart, just moved all the chemical factories across the Rhine River into Strasbourg, which is in Germany, and said, well, we're starting over here. And built BASF and a whole bunch of other giant companies. But some of my favourite portmanteau words are this one, which is Kummerspeck. That means grief bacon. When you overeat because you're sad, it's when you're eating the ice cream and you get Kummerspeck. And then if you have Kummerspeck, you have what I've got now, which is called Blausenpop, which is men pull their shirt out slightly from their waist, so you can't tell if their shirt's untucked or if they're fat. I'm fat. So that's one that's important to understand. One which was they keep inventing these new words, which is really important. When Justin Bieber toured Germany in the late 90s, they invented this word, which is Backpfeifgesicht, which means a face that you see but immediately want to punch. And I kind of got that. And I was reading, 2 weeks ago, I was reading the German newspaper. That's how I keep up my German. And this word popped up. And it was to describe a right-wing politician, which is Teletubbies Zaruk Winkler, which is a man so stupid he waves back at Teletubbies. So I thought that was fantastic, and I'm going to use it at every opportunity. I want to talk about the kind of macro effects of what's going on in the market right now. Grant lobbed this on me like 2 minutes before the speech. Can you talk about the macro effects? Sure. Right. Let's talk macro and finance right now. Give me 5 minutes. So I want to use a metaphor for this. And the metaphor for this is the kind of summer of 1942. What happened in 1942, the Germans, once again they come up, realised that bombing the industrial centres in England wasn't working. So they switched their bombing raids to what they called the Baedeker bombings. They'd taken this tourist guide and decided they were going to bomb all the beautiful places. So what happened with that is that these two guys who hated each other were forced to come together. The man on your right, you'll recognise, that's John Maynard Keynes. He's the founder of monetarism, which has driven most of the economic thinking since the Second World War and became very popular with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and all those kind of thinkers. It was where markets are steered by governments, where they unleash capital, steer the market and work in their space and the way in which they operate. The man on your right, is F.A. Hayek, Friedrich Hayek. And he was the opposite. He wanted markets to be completely set free because he'd seen the effects of the government control of the Weimar Republic and said, this really doesn't work. And you can kind of choose who you want to believe in here. At the moment, we're kind of in a monetarist theme. Our government wants to control markets and they want to work on them really hard. So when Grant said, I want you to talk about the macro effects, I want to think, well, what are the great examples of where a government's trying to steer the market? All of you will be working with customers who are facing into superannuation. And you realise that when the Albanese government came into control, that they decided that they wanted to steer the superannuation market and put the super tests on, making sure that all the super funds weren't taking any risk. So the great metaphor for this is what it looks like when a government starts to control markets. You get this distribution of funds. You can see it's a relatively normal distribution, very wide set of what's going on. And then as soon as the government starts to get into control, the distribution goes from normal, which is a normal curve, to paranormal. What's happened is that everyone is performing almost exactly the same. The challenge in that is that the fund returns there, the explanation of the variance is explained by the valuation of properties, mostly done by the industry funds who have 2 years ago started to put little asterisks in their property evaluation saying these properties will be revalued at the manager's discretion. which means no one really knows how much these properties are worth. As the centres of Sydney and Melbourne in particular have been gutted by COVID and no one's working, the valuations of all of these things have fallen, but the funds aren't reporting those, of course. The other thing is foreign currency exposure. So you get this kind of really interesting thing going on. That's what happens when you start to steer markets. So right now, the benefit of being in different super funds is really opaque. If everyone's getting the same outcome, then what's the benefit? The problem with that is that not everyone's being charged the same price for the same outcome, and certainly not everyone is getting the same service as everybody else. One of the natural effects of this is going to be the growth in self-managed superannuation funds. People who have got high balances, and by that I'm talking greater than 500,000 inside these funds, are now seeking ways to get out of them because they're starting to think that they can get better service and better returns elsewhere. And that's going to mean that sector is going to grow. A report came out on Friday of last week said that the two natural winners of this change in the government is going to be self-managed super funds and industry funds. The retail funds are going to be squeezed. So understanding that there's going to be a boom in those services, people end work and start to do something, then setting yourself up for that is going to be really important. The slide behind you right now shows you what happens with high net worth individuals in Australia. COVID had a big suppressing effect on high net worth individuals in Australia, and it's only just starting to recover when you think about the people with more than, and you can do whatever definition you like, we use more than $2.5 million in investable assets outside their home and their superannuation and investment property. And there's about 465,000 of those Australians in Australia, and they're growing quite quickly again now, which is quite interesting. The demand for service and insight for those people is quite extraordinary. But it's bigger than you think. This is the number that the government is persistently talking about, that the Productivity Commission is talking about, this 3.5 trillion, which is bigger than the GDP of Australia, if you think about it for a second. 3.5 trillion stored in superannuation and cash savings. That's an extraordinary amount, and that's money that isn't really at work. But that's not really the true number. As last year, I was at Treasury, and I spoke to a friend of mine who I studied with who works there. He's got a PhD in economics and has never worked anywhere else but Treasury. And I said, what's the real number? He said, we don't know. And we kept having drinks until he said, probably about 10.2 trillion. That's a big secret because you've got to factor in the value of all the businesses that are going to be sold, all the assets that exist, and all the things which are held outside of the business, outside of the family wealth. So the answer is no one really knows how much money it is, but it is the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of the world. This wave is going to be extraordinary, but there are big effects at work. Increased health risk is accelerating wealth transfer. The youngest baby boomer is now 60, and between 60 and 70, it is dead set sniper's alley for humans. If you make it from 60 to 70, you're probably going to make it to 80, and if you make it to 80, you're probably going to make it for 90. Medical businesses are never going to be busier because the need for people to work in this space is going to be incredible. The big ones are livers and hearts. If you can start to think about investing in those, that's going to be a big opportunity for everyone, because if you go into the hospital and say, your heart needs to be done, and it's 10 grand, no one says, can I get the cheaper one? They all say, what's the best I can get in this space? We've got some good technology in this space, but it's actually quite accelerating. The business is not set up to deal with that. We don't have enough beds. We're not designed to have an ageing population. We're not designed to have aged care systems. We actually haven't done it. And if you think about that's bad, all the superannuation industry has been set up to acquire money, isn't designed for retirement. The government is forcing them to deal with this by using this thing called the Retirement Income Covenant, and they haven't done the work. So the complexity is going up and up and up. And guess what? When they're looking around for help at this stage, they're probably not going to go to the retirement fund. They're going to start ringing your phone number and saying, hey, listen, these guys have no clue what they're talking about. I'm going to need some help in this space. Can you help me? Tougher business environment is slowing down revenue growth. One of the things that we published last week was the gap between older people and younger people in terms of what's going on. Money is coming out of the market really fast. The cost of living is going up so quickly, and the uncertainty around employment is rising so quickly that 30-year-olds are now incredibly uncertain about their future. Older people like me, we're fine, we're done. You know, if Russia invades Tasmania, I'll sit on the beach at Balmoral and say, Well, that's interesting because it doesn't really bother me anymore. I've got to worry about my kids and the next generation and what's going on. But those tougher economic conditions are hurting. And the volatile equity market is stalling property. And I think we can see the effect of that. Last month, the Domain recorded we had the lowest clearance in 3 years in the Sydney market. It's because there's so much uncertainty in the market, and that's pushing down the property market as we speak. So let's choose a number. Unnamed, I've just given his name, which is a bit unfortunate. He's probably going to get in trouble. But there's let's call it 4.9 trillion in transfer in the next decade. That's an extraordinary amount, and double that for the next 2 decades. And that's got to go somewhere. The wave is coming, and real chaos too. This is an important painting. This is Hokikato's Great Wave. And if you go and see that in Osaka in Japan, it's probably the most copied image in the entire world. And I looked at it all my life. I got to Osaka in Japan and I went to see it, and it's this big. It's really disappointing. It's like, oh shit, I've come all this way. Best thing I did in Japan is I went to a place called Omron Rent-A-Car and rented a Nissan Skyline R32. $80 a day for a Japanese supercar. Probably did my license several times in Japan, but that's a interesting moment. I'm driving around Japan trying to flog this thing. I said to the rental car guy, he said, "You promise safety driving?" "Yeah, I promise safety driving, mate. But give me the full insurance." I'm trying to drive this thing around Japan, and I'm on the phone to my friend in America, the guy who runs my design team in America, and said, "Can't get this thing to the drift." And he said, "You've got the traction control on." And I went, "Oh, you're right." So that was fun. But so you go to Japan and you see this, and this is a really important painting. First of all, it's blue. Blue is a really rare colour at the time that this was painted in the sort of middle 1800s because it was hard to get and it was made by crushing lapis. But the Japanese at that time started to trade with the Dutch and they had access to blue. It was called Prussian blue. Second thing is it's actually full of motion. If you think about the paintings of that time, it's all gardens and people standing full and stiff. You can see what's happening with this big wave. And if you look into it, there's a detail here of these guys on this boat. And if it had titles, they'd be going, "Oh shit, this is bad," and they're trying to sort of figure out how they're going to get to safety. And the third thing is it's got perspective. You can see Mount Fuji in the background. Perspective was a really unusual thing at that time. Here's our Great Wave. This is what's going on with us. This is the number of people moving into retirement by year, and 2024 is here. We're about halfway through the big wave. The wave crashes and then it builds again. And there's nothing we can do to stop this. This wave is coming, it's significant, and there will be chaos around the back of this because no one's really ready for it. The services that you provide are going to be extraordinarily important through this process as this converts from savings to capital to investment and from investment to income and thinking about how those things are going to work. The biggest fear of mass affluent and high net worth Australians is that they're going to outlive their savings at the moment. That's their biggest fear. For less wealthy Australians, then those are even more significant. We call it FORO, fear of running out. Everyone's got massive fear of running out at the moment, and understanding that becomes quite important. So, how do you build rules of uncertainty? And to Grant's point, you go back to history and you start to look at your heroes. These are my heroes, 3 of my heroes, and only a nerd would me could love them. The man on your right is, on your left, extreme left, is a man called Derek de Sola Price, who gave us a thing called Price's Law. Price's Law states that the square root of the number of people inside any organisation do half the work. That's why the perfect business size is 2, because 2 people are doing half the work and the other 2 are cleaning up. That's why the Beatles were successful. George and Paul did more than half the work. And that's what's going on. That's kind of interesting, right? If you've got 100 people in your business, you've got 10 people doing half the work. And it's really important to know who those 10 are. The man in the middle is a guy called David Lane. He was the first guy in the 1970s who took what are called algorithms away from the mathematicians and started to put them into social research, which means that you could put unknown integers into algorithms and just kind of guess at what things were going to be. Before that, they were the area of navigation, which are the first algorithms ever built, so people could work out things with certainty. This allowed you to work with uncertainty. And the man on your right is a guy called Robin Dunbar, who gave you a thing called Dunbar's number. The world is full of specific numbers which are hardwired into humans. It's a very famous piece of research which is called the Red Starling research, which was done in the 1950s, which looked at the common frequency of sexual partners in humans. And the answer, by the way, was 21, if anyone's interested in knowing. This is the point where everyone goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they go, and go through that situation. But Dunbar's number is about the number of relationships that any human can hold, and the number is 152. What was interesting about that research was decried and everyone said it wasn't particularly good until Facebook came out about 10 years ago and said the most common number of friends on Facebook is 154. So there's something going on there. That's about the number. That limits the number of customers that intimacy can solve. I was really interested in the previous speaker who was very good, but his service worked on one-time transactions done at scale. Yours doesn't, mine doesn't either. It's longitudinal transactions which done with a great deal of intimacy and often a great deal of uncertainty. And the confidence transfer that has to happen, and that becomes really important. But here's some numbers about what the market looks like. If you take, I can't do accountants very well, so I used financial advisors as the model because there's so many accountants who are accountants but are not actually working as accountants. So 133,000 are registered accountants in Australia, but how many of them are actually working? So I used advisors because no one is registered advisor who's not working as an advisor. They give up their registration straight away. You can do the advisor population times prices number, then you can do the market size of the mass affluent, and then you can do the Dunbar's number of available supply, and that will give you the number of the size of the people who actually need support in this market at any given time. So if you add this out, you can see that the number of potential clients who are unserviced at the market is 1.718 million. That number could be 20% wrong either way. We don't know because we won't prove it out through them. But then the number is absolutely extraordinary. The government is very worried about this. They know about it. The current Minister, Stephen Jones, knows about it. He's taken my numbers and taken them away. Vanguard have taken the numbers and taken away. And there's always a heart and moment when you produce an algorithm, you produce the evidence and you give it to the minister and they kind of come back and say, you're wrong. But they've come back and said, yeah, this is a big problem. And we don't know how to solve this. We don't know how to scale this service. We think that there's going to be some magic in technology and we're going to go digital advice and digital accounting and digital things. And I say to him every time, people do not pass trust to computers, they pass trust to humans. When people are in uncertainty, they need to actually get certainty from the company that they're dealing with, not from an algorithm, and it just won't work. So that's the size. What's really interesting about this is that as a whole economy, we've been moving from accumulation, which we've been doing from the 1960s, and now we're moving into decumulation, which instead of people trying to make money, they're starting to think about how to invest money and how to pass that money on and move that through that very well. So here's two macro forces that are working. The one on your left is Jim Chalmers, Dr. Jim Chalmers. Doesn't have a PhD in economics, he's got a PhD in politics, and his PhD is on Paul Keating, dancer and brawler. If you want to go to sleep, it's better than melatonin. It'll knock you out real fast because it's not a heartbreaking work of staggering genius. The man on your right is Alfred Marshall, and you probably won't recognise him. He's the first economics professor at Cambridge University, and his big discovery was the law of supply and demand, that as supply decreased, demand increased, and prices rose. He didn't actually do that work. He was not a good guy. In fact, it was his wife, Jenny Marshall, who did it while 19 and pregnant in a bedsit in Brighton. That's the second worst honeymoon on the record. The worst honeymoon, of course, is Eva von Braun, who 2 minutes before being murdered was married to Adolf Hitler. So the reality is that what's going to happen in your industry is that the price of your service is going to become increasingly valuable. Let's say make it 1.5 million people who are trying to find help at this time. Supply is going down and prices are going up, and we're watching that across the board as people react and move into that space. So talking to other people's children about money, which is what's going to happen as the big transfer goes on, is going to become increasingly complex. About a couple of years ago, I was with an accountant at this place, just not too far north of here, it's at Port Douglas, and I've known this guy for a long time. He's down at the South Coast. We played rugby league together back in the 80s. He moved to the South Coast, built a practice, and we're having a beer by the pool, talking about what's going on, and it was one of his young staff, and he said, it's just occurred to me that most of my clients are 70. And I said, well, that means your business will be wound up in 12 years, right? Or are you refilling it? What are you doing? He said, no, it won't be wound up. And I said, well, the average age for an Australian male is 82. So it's gone, mate. What are you doing? How are you handling it? What are you doing? And the young woman was saying, I've been trying to tell him this for years. And he was getting increasingly angry, so I did what most cowards let me do, is I just said, do you want another beer? And then just evaporated. Then I went and saw him at breakfast the next day, and he said, you're right, I've thought about it. And I said, but what's the average number of kids for your clients? And he said, 2. And I said, how many conversations you had with them? None. I'm like, well, Rob, I think we should probably change that. So what can we do to change that and change that conversation? Because that's where real growth's going to come from, and it's going to be relatively easy. Here's what's going on in this marketplace. If you are building trust, because you are in the trust business whether you like it or not, and you leave trust clues behind all the time. If you want to read a great book about this, there's a man called Robert Cialdini who wrote a book called Influence. If you want to get it in 20 minutes, he did a great speech which you can download as a podcast. You don't even have to read the book. You can pick that up on the way to work, and it's absolutely worth understanding how this works. Trust is layered and takes time. The new generation describe themselves through investment. It is heartbreaking and mind-shattering because they didn't earn the money, but they want to describe themselves through the way they're investing and how they're using things. New models are necessary, but the interesting thing about this is that to be successful in the future, and Grant alluded to this today, is that you have to build utility first. Utility is a very powerful trigger in people making decisions. How much does it cost? What does it do? How much does it cost? What does it do? And trust is the stack that fills that up. And then focusing on the tech stack. About 7 years ago, we had 2 people working in IT and high-end computer information outside our business. We now have 17, and we've got 2 vacant roles. Finding someone who is good at this is impossibly hard and really hard in Australia, and we're having to look around the world. So understanding that you are in the future in the IT business, and either doing it yourself or working with outsourced providers is something that's really important to understand. What's also really important to understand that managing those people is incredibly complex. Building networks of people who help you and you can rely on is going to be much easier. Building it yourself is almost impossible. Let's have a think about the trust business at the moment. Every quarter I run trust research. This is what my postgraduate research is in, and I'm really interested in. We've lost a bit of skirting here. Let's have a look at a Madison Trust where people stack. If you go down to psychologists, which is about halfway down at 6.8, you can see that all the helping organisations are the ones which actually get the strong trust numbers. And the person that you wanted most turn up when things turn bad is a paramedic. And you can see what's going on. Look who the most trusted financial services person is there really quickly. It's the accountants. And then it goes down at a pretty fixed rate. You can see here that you really don't want to be an insurance company executive. They're in bad shape. Politicians, pretty bad shape. Bank executives, retail funds, superannuation funds executives, and financial planners, year after year after year after year, the accountants outperform in this space. So building those trust metrics about your business are the things which are going to allow you to keep clients, scale, and add other services, so making that happen. However, not everyone is created equal, and we need to understand this. This is the thinking of Carl Jung, and I'm sure you know who he is. He's a pretty famous German psychologist. He worked with Freud. He's probably a better thinker than Freud. Freud was all about repressed memories. Jung was all about behaviourism, which is that people come with a hardwired set of behaviours. Hands up anyone who's got more than one child in this room. Hands up anyone who's all of those kids are all exactly the same because they're in the same house with the same stimuluses and the same. Yeah, no, me too. I've got the adorable Charlotte. She's just the loveliest person. She works for Deloitte. She's very happy in those processes. She wants to work at organisations. The mysterious Harry. No one knows what's going on with Harry. Couldn't tell you. I don't know anything about his life. He's kind of 6'5", 120 kilos, a really good athlete, a really good academic. We found the University Medal for Economics on his desk. I thought it was a set of my couplings he'd sold, and I picked it up. What's this? Oh, it's the University Medal. What for? Economics. Right. When was that? Oh, about 3 weeks ago. And he said, don't you think you could have told us? Oh, yeah, everyone else's parents were there. Were they? You little shit. Well, let's go and have a talk about that. He graduated recently, Dean's List, first class honours, didn't bother going to the ceremony. Oh, it's just a performance. Oh, is it, mate? Ever thought about it's not for you, it's for your mum? Anyway, that's... And then we've got James, and the James is everybody loves James. He's 6'4", blonde, blue-eyed, kind of one of those happy, smiley kids. He went to Copenhagen and he said, I'm going to try out for basketball. And I had a friend in Denmark and said, how serious is basketball at Copenhagen University? Oh, yeah, it's the third most popular sport. It's handball and soccer and then basketball and ice skating. I said, well, good luck, go along. Gets in the team. So, turns up from Australia, gets in the team. And then he said, how'd you go? And he said, I'm the starting shooting guard for Copenhagen University. And I said to my wife, either James has got a lot better or Danish basketball's pretty ordinary. But anyway, I go to visit him, and in typical James style, his room's just disgusting. So I look around his room and say, let's go shopping for some Manchester. Let's buy some sheets because this stuff stinks and we're going to throw it out. Anyway, walking across the campus, every sort of 50 minutes, hi, James. Oh, excuse me, Dad. It's like, oh, no, God. Let's talk about protection. Anyway. He turned up at Christmas with this beautiful blonde girl called Georgia. Who's Georgia? Just a friend. Can she spend for Christmas? Sure. Anyway, that's what's going on. But this is the buckets that people put themselves into. Avoider, box ticker, delegator, self-improver, and prudent controller. Humans are hardwired into those sectors, and understanding who you're dealing with is really important. It's really important that you understand what drives them and what success looks to them, because it's not all the same. Avoiders are people who don't want to deal with the problem, so they often come to you with chaos. They've put everything behind them, and when you open the shoebox and find all the receipts, you go, yeah, this is a problem. Box ticker is someone who just gets it done every year and goes through it and says, I've done the process and going through it. Delegator gives it to you. You do it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm not interested in it. Do it. How much is that? $5,000? Sure. I don't care. Move on with it. Self-improver is some people call them coach seekers because they're trying to take your time and trying to understand what's going on and want to do it. They're difficult clients. They can suck up your time like you wouldn't believe. They'll be on the phone every week. And a prudent controller is possibly the worst type of client because they are saying, why was that $220 that hour and this hour's only $170? Because if I look on this page 3 of this document, it says you're going to do this and you've only done this. You can find those guys really easy. When they come into you, meet them for the first time, you ask them what their mobile phone plan is. And if they know, say, thank you very much for your time. I think you need somebody else. So someone who's got enough money to see you and knows that they're on the Optus $85 a week and they're doing the cheapest possible, they're not going to be good, right? They're complex clients. And you'll get to a point in your career when you say, you're just not worth it, mate. See ya. And work with the other guys because they actually want you to do your job. If you think about the evolution of advice and engagement models, this is the law in Australia at the moment. Engage, review, admin, relationship, report, review. And there isn't really a way around this, and we have to find ways to manage this. Around the world, it's starting to look like this. It's service. So instead of just that kind of old-fashioned met you at the golf club, started to form a relationship, went through the process, did the paperwork, starting to become service, relationship, and then the experience. The previous speaker was talking about that. He turned his business into an experience business. There's a guy at the back who spoke at the same time saying, we're focused on the experience. That's great. The law requires a shit ton of paperwork at the moment to actually drive the experience, and you have to be able to evidence that because what's happened, the regulator's going to turn up and say, show me the file notes. Show me what's going on, show me what you've done, and show me why you made the decision. Let's be clear, it's not just the old that are facing into this problem. If you have a look into this group who've never received financial advice but are considering doing it, it's starting to spike in the middle. The young are starting to spike in that space. They may not be homeowners, but they know how to save and they know how to invest and they know they need good structures around it. Let's be clear also in Australia is that advice in Australia is currently full. This is advice businesses. And you can see that the micro ones, of which there's about 5,000, they've got 127 clients. The really good ones have got about 152 clients. I want to talk very quickly about 3 models of success that we're seeing that starting to emerge. There's kind of multiple ways to grow. Everyone thinks they're going to get growth. Clients aren't hard to find at the moment. They're really not. People are looking for help and advice. And I don't know anyone who's running an accountancy business or anyone who's running an advice business who's saying, well, growth's not my problem. Growth's my problem. I can't get clients. People are getting clients. It's how to scale efficiently. It's important. Have a look at what we can see the difference between the Australia and the UK. The bottom number is really important. Australia, it's about 144 clients on average. In the UK, it's 228. And you can see what the income is doing. Australia's income is caught up. 5 years ago, that was about $4,500 per client. It's now $7,700 and change and drifting up. Remember we talked about the effect of the lack of supply? It's drifting up, drifting up, drifting up. My accountant, who I love dearly, I'm on my second one because I've been in business for 22 years, and the first one retired and irritates me by sending pictures as he did this morning of the south of Italy. I'm at Lake Garda. Are you? I'm at a bloody hotel on the Gold Coast, up at 6 o'clock talking to the Americans. But that started to drift up. My accountant, my second one, has put up their fee. I don't really mind, right, because he does a good job, but it's important to understand. So what we wanted to do was talk about how people are scaling around the world. Oops. And what's going on. So the first thing to think about is the right platforms and partners, how people are working in that space. The right tech stack, making sure you got the tech stack right. 3 years ago, that wasn't an important conversation. Now it's a critical conversation. Then it's the right processes, making as much of your work process-driven as possible. And then the right people, that's going to be a challenge and has been a challenge for a long time. And then the right customer proposition, again, that has been a problem for the right time. So if you think about it this, and you looked at people who are different in space and where people are coming on. This is customers, and we asked customers what they wanted. So accumulators need a low-touch model, much process as possible, charge for service, risk tolerance mapped, and all the way to high net worth. That's a much more high-touch model, platform plus, et cetera, et cetera. You've got a copy of the slides, and Grant will be sending them to you, so you don't have to photograph them. So a little while ago, I went to the UK where they're a bit more advanced in this space and looked at a combined accounting and financial advice business, which is based near where I used to live in the UK. I spent a few years over there working for Richard Branson and spoke to these guys who focus on wealthy farming and business families from the Norwich region. You wouldn't think it's particularly wealthy, but it is. It's where the pumping industry came from. It's where the banking industry came from. I'm sure you've heard of Norwich Union. I'm sure you've heard of all those businesses. They all sprang up there because it became wealthy very early in England, in the early 1800s, and remained in that space. And spoke to the person whose name was, she doesn't want any more conversations with people about what she's doing. Her goal is to build systems so that she can get our high service advisors to 300 clients per advisor. She manages a thing called NPS, which is Net Promoter Score, and it has to be 7.5 or better. And her on-platform funds are advised to 3.5 billion by the end of next year. What they do for people is they also provide, for customers, they also provide an investment platform. It's a thing called a discretionary funds management account in the UK. It's called a managed discretionary account here. It allows you to take client funds and invest those client funds, usually on some sort of index. Most popular in Australia are Lonsec or Morningstar indexes, where they have access to them and they've got someone to ring up and talk about them, because the thing that they most want to do is ring up and talk to them about them. And let me show you how they've built their model. This is an old model. I'm sure there are 2 versions past this now, and how they mechanize this. This is all done with ChatGPT. Unfortunately, the arrows aren't coming out, but it starts with all their phones are answered by Teams. So you ring up and the phone call is answered by Teams. Really interesting thing is that if you push your phone through Teams, that you can record and transcribe every conversation. It gets a transcription, and I'm sure some of you guys are already using it on meetings to understand what's going on. That becomes an MP3. Then it's used a system called Whisper. 2 of the big superannuation funds in Australia now, CBUS and Aware, are using Whisper to record every telephone conversation, because Whisper can turn your conversation into action. If you join it with this thing called Cerbert, which is a sentence transformer, it's all hosted on Microsoft Azure. The large language model and the database, the database is called Pinecone, and that turns this into this big file. That means that if you will produce a record of every contact for you, a record of the jobs that are to be done, a record who said they would deliver what by what time, and it is infinitely searchable and rememberable. You can print it out, you can put it on the server, you can look after it. Most people choose Azure because that means you can store it in SharePoint, and SharePoint's really secure, and the government really like that way of storing stuff. We moved from the G Suite to this system ourselves about 4 years ago. Expensive, time-consuming and annoying, but highly secure now. There'll be no uni supers who recently got hacked, who are in the process of going from AWS to this system. So the really interesting thing about this is that none of these are expensive. Teams and MP3 and Whisper, that's $10.95 a month per person per user. Cerbert's free. Azure is whatever the cost is. Pinecone's free. ChatGPT 3 is free. So none of those are expensive. You just need to know how to drive it. And what it means that they get to see all the time is what they've agreed to do for what client, the actual record of every conversation with a client, the jobs that have got to be done, and their latest version, and I'm just playing with it now through a thing called Rise, stimulates you every day saying, hey, today you said you would be doing this job. Have you done it? And often the answer is, fuck. And then I send it to somebody else. Can you do this? Which is kind of annoying. So these things are moving incredibly fast at this time. So what they did a little while ago is they gave away all their lower value clients. Anyone who they were getting less than £4,500 for a year, they gave them away and put them into a separate business for a bunch of phone guys only, and they focused only on the high value clients. And that's starting to happen all around the industry. So if you think about what's happening in the world, remember this old model, engage, review, admin, relationship, report, and review? They've got it down to engage and review, and they've outsourced every other part of the operation. They're only doing the high value pieces, which is getting to know the person and reviewing the relationship. Everything else is either outsourced to, they've got 3 outsourced providers, one in India, one in Vietnam, and one in the Philippines that do all the back-end work for them. And they're working on setting up a really clear process and driving the labour arbitrage. A very expensive person in the Philippines, which is where we have our outsourced business, is $13,000 a year. That person in Australia, this person's a Columbia level graduate computer scientist, that person in Australia would be 200 grand to start. And Sarah's absolutely fantastic. So if you think about the 5 things to do right now, choosing the right partners becomes really important. I guess you're here today because you are choosing the right partner, or you're thinking hard about who you partner with in the space. The second thing is that the best businesses are putting a rigorous focus on process, so they're driving the work out either through ChatGPT or machine learning or understanding the process really clearly. I was really interested in the last speaker. Despite the fact he talked about growth and the sizzle and the gassing things up, he had a really clear process for what he was doing. Every step was a process and the outcome was really well understood. The process and the partnership should drive up client satisfaction. Reputation and reach is your superpower. Those are the best things about your business. This isn't a one-time game for you. You have to see these business people time and time and time and time again, and you have to constantly anchor and add value. The 4th thing is 2 income streams. 1 intimate high service, 1 less intimate lower service. Getting those 2 income streams happening becomes really important because the low service guys will become your high service guys in future, and that's just building a pipeline for the business. Maybe they never will, but they're certainly going to be there. And then the final thing is kind of making a difference in people's lives. I was working when I was sitting down there before, and I was stuck on writing a letter to someone. So I use Copilot for what I call the blank page problems. The blank page problems are you're sitting there thinking, I've got to write this letter, it's really difficult. I just put the prompt into Copilot, and I wrote it, and 13 seconds later I had a first draft, and I sent it off and sent it to Sharona, who runs the office, and said, can you make this slightly better, and send it off. Try it today. When you get a chance, go into Copilot and say, write me 5 letters. 5 letters to ask people for recommendations, 5 letters to thank people, 5 letters to describe who you are and what you're doing and what you're offering to them now, and you'll be shocked at the quality. The new version of ChatGPT, which came out today, the Omni version 4.0, we've been playing with that for a little while. We convinced the guys at Microsoft and Google and other places that we're a research organisation. They should give us beta access to all these things. We've been using it to ring up superannuation companies and ask them questions and seeing what their response times was and how well they answered it and ranking the answer and doing all those things. I presented it to the CEO of Cbus yesterday before I flew up here. There may not have been a more annoyed person in all of Australia than Christian Falk yesterday. And he said, how did you do this? And I said, well, anyone can do it. I can do it. Anyone can do it, right? It's not that hard. Anyone with half a brain. And that's what's coming. That's the fluidity of the market now and how that's going to work. I'm going to stop here, but I want to say that your role in the transformation of this wealth is incredibly important. Before people come and see you, they are mostly in chaos. Everything's a bit of a mess and they don't want to understand what the future looks like. The uncertainty in the market now is higher than I've ever seen it. Your job in taking it from chaos to order could not be overstated. So making sure that you get the chance to do that and to scale that and to build a great business for yourself is important. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you have a great conference.
Hello. All right, who's got some questions for Andrew? Someone's got to have some questions. Paul? There we go.
How much does it cost you in dev time to maintain your networks and things and using
I refuse to answer that under the grounds that I'll be really embarrassed and annoyed.
Because Pinecone, it's like an LLM that's private, so you're not getting it IP or confidential data shared in the cloud, is it?
No, you can put it on your own server. That used to be really expensive, Paul. It's not expensive anymore. It used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can do it for $5,000 now. But the biggest cost for me is the humans and the mistakes. So humans are $122,000 a month, to be candid, to do that. And the mistakes, the last one was a Porsche, that I drove off a cliff. But the ones that worked have been really good. And so that's part of the process, is that we're going to drive a few Porsches off cliffs, and we just have to be open to it. That's why I encourage you, unless you've got someone who can be a really good, ship's pilot, don't do it yourself. You'll burn capital really fast. The cost of doing it is coming really down. There are good companies around the world now, and you can access any company. You can access companies all over the world to do this for you now. So it's not trivial.
Supplementary question. How do you manage the guardrails so you don't have a Air Canada debacle?
We've got a very tight dev structure and dev control teams and about how we do that. The big mistakes in the guardrails, Paul, are when we think we can fix things and we'll think, we'll give this a crack. And 6 months later, it hasn't worked. And you can calculate how much it's cost you. And you can start throwing good money after bad. And some of the most heartbreaking decisions as a business owner, when you're trying to expand into other areas, is you have to say, we're ruling a line under this, and we're writing that off. That hurts.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else with any questions? Oh, yep.
Andrew, it was interesting to see all the data on the baby boomers, being a baby boomer between 60 and 70, and I hope I get to 70, which is in 4 months' time, because then I can look forward to getting to 80, I hope. I retired as a personal injury lawyer about 9 years ago, and then we had COVID, and the owner of the large Sydney law firm asked me to come back to help them travel out of the downturn in COVID, because in personal injury, no one was going to work, and having accidents, no one was driving to work and having accidents. So I came back for a year, and then it was extended to 3. But is there data showing people in this age group that would normally be retired coming back into the workforce, and is that accessible? So
there's two things, and just email me. If anyone wants to ask me anything, just email me at andrew@coredata.com.au. It's bifurcated. So there's a number of people who are just exiting the industry completely and kind of giving up. But there's if you break it up, the kind of right-hand side of that Jungian matrix, the people who try and take control of the future are working longer. And the reason they're working longer is they don't think they have enough money, which is a fear-based thing. And we've seen this in our researchers. I've got one of our high net worth guys is a lawyer like you. He's gone back to work at 72 because he doesn't think he's got enough money. So I sat with Frank and at the end of the focus group and said, well, let's go through this. So have you still got the house in Collaroy? Yeah. Okay, have you still got the house in Coogee? Yeah. Share portfolio is north of 2.5? Yeah. Mate, I think you're okay. I think you're okay. Oh, no. The wife's worried and sort of stuff. It's like, that's unrealistic, right? But there's some really interesting things that are going on there. Long COVID's very interesting. People are working with brain fog now that they haven't had in the past. And the other one, and I don't know how to think about this, if you go to any of the big superannuation funds or banks or any of those things in Australia, in Sydney and Melbourne, the offices are like ghost towns. No one's going to work. So the work is really changing, and I don't know how that ends. So we shall see. But mate, you must be busy. There's no one's got your skills anymore. That whole industry is just empty.
Well, I came out and linked up with Rod and Michael and Grant.
Yeah, because we're doing work with all the insurance companies, and there's just no skills. Yeah. No one can find any skills, so you can work forever if you want. I mean, if you want.
My wife says I could always say no.
Yeah, my wife says the same. They should meet.
Andrew, just on the demographic side, Obviously, you've looked at the wealth side for the children coming back, but in front of us is the baby boomers, as you pointed out. One, healthcare, and the second one is probably three actually, healthcare. Next one's dementia, and then after that is aged care. So can you just sort of address those and what the impact is going to be on Australian society?
So Grant's really right. Healthcare is that we're not set up to do the long healthcare that's required, and that's as the body starts to break down. That's mostly to do with mobility and falls and all those kind of things. I'm sure you've got aged parents. After the first fall, it's often a pretty quick decline from there. My mother has had her first fall, and so we know what the path looks like now, and all my friends are going through it. We just don't have the supply of medical facilities that are set up for it, and it's like we just didn't see it coming. It's like, how did we not see this coming? And that's kind of interesting to me. The dementia thing is, as Grant's pointed out, is a really, really big deal. The cognitive decline is something which is hard to observe until it really becomes something. Two of the guys that I played rugby with have now got early onset dementia, and they're in bad shape. One was a very successful fund manager, one was a very successful computer salesman, but they're gone. And one of them handled it really well and sent out a note saying, if I don't recognise you, this is what's happening. And that's kind of interesting in what's happening. It's going to accelerate in Australia. We don't have the facilities for that, but the tricky bit is, how do you handle the assets when someone becomes intellectually intestate? This is where you face into it, and understanding this. Setting up the trust, the processes and the systems for this is really important. I've been a bugger to this for my entire family, and we've needed it twice, and it's really important that we've been able to say, when, okay, Dad's not what he should be anymore, we need to start thinking about this and how he's managed. And they said, well, we've got a plan, and the person in charge of this is Nigel, he's our accountant. Give this to Nigel, he's going to operate it. So if you want to argue about it, talk to me, talk to Nigel, because we've got a plan which Dad signed off and Jenny signed off, and that's what we're moving through. So being in that position is unbelievably valuable. We've been doing research on this for a little while, and here's a really interesting phase. When that plan is set up and they're working with a third-party supplier, which might be you, no one has ever said to me, this is expensive, ever. Because the emotional drag on that is absolutely extraordinary. We think the number of people moving into that state in Australia in the next little while, the next 5 years, is going to be close to 2.5 million Australians. The big insurance companies are planning for that. The people who are doing the most work on it is Swiss Re, because they end up being the reinsurers for all of this, and they want to understand the size of the problem. And the size is pretty scary. Email me and I can send you a snapshot of a report we've done in that space, because the numbers are extraordinary and the government isn't really ready for it. And they're kind of, I get quite upset about this, because the NDIS, which was designed to support that, isn't in any shape to support it. They don't have the services, they don't have the people, they don't have the training. And what it looks like to me is that's been designed for people to make a lot of money out of, because people are kind of making great money out of those schemes and the services are poor. But it's going to have to be solved soon.
Aged care.
Aged care is really interesting, Grant. You'll notice that the big superannuation funds are all going into the aged care businesses because they can do the maths and they know that that's a good destination for their assets, and it's going to rise in value. It's going to have about a 15 to 20 year cycle, because as that curve shows you before, it's going to rise really quickly, reach a peak valuation about 2045, and then it's going to fall off a cliff. The other people who are moving into it is a group of ex-McKinsey partners, one of whom I was at university with, and they've put hundreds of millions of dollars into this space to high quality aged care in destination suburbs. So where I live in Mossman, there's a very good one which is up near the Oval. Up in Narrabeen, they've built one which is close to the beach, because there is a fantasy that your aged parents, people with dementia, want to be by a beautiful oval or by the beach. They don't, but it makes the family feel better. So that becomes a really interesting outcome for that. Have a look at people who are trying to play in those spaces. When you're thinking about investments for your portfolios, there's some interesting funds in those spaces. I'm not an investment expert, but I'm sure you know plenty of people who are, and there are good businesses in that space.
There's also a lot of talk over in the US, because as the baby boomers move into aged care, their housing stock, where some of them have got as you said with your friend, they've got their family home and then they've got another investable or maybe the holiday home, that stock coming onto the market. Do you think there's going to be an overhang in the next 15, 20 years?
Not if the government's got anything to do with it.
Immigration, yeah.
I'm very interested to see what they do in this budget. Did you see that Albo announced, I think it was the White Rabbit, always late, always chasing something.
Yeah.
he's announced $12.6 billion into social housing. $12.6 billion. So that's $1 billion a month, which is a non-trivial spend. Where are you going to get the builders, Albo? But anyway, if no one thinks this through, it's quite interesting. The other part for me is that you could fix that with different policy settings. If you made that investment tax deductible like they do in Singapore, or if you made the people who can invest in it and said, we'll give you a government loan, which is 1% above the average interest rate and has the tax effectiveness, you would release so much capital from private capital, the government wouldn't have to touch it. And guess what? Private companies tend to be better at running those things than public companies. So it's that Keynesian method, right? They want to control it. And it is designed to be a vote winner. It's designed to get for the people who don't have housing to think about that they're going to get housing and be in those spaces. So Grant's right. There are three big things coming down the pipeline. So housing is going to be an issue. The government is going to try and find a way to release capital from housing stock because there's a lot of money stuck in housing stock. The other way to do that is tax the bananas out of it so that if you've got investment properties or if you've got holiday homes, they become tax ineffective. And then the other thing is to think about what are the things that are going to drive longevity: hearts, livers, spleens, kidneys, all the things which break down, hips, although that's pretty well understood now.
Final question. Garno Institute, and the girl who did a study on it is now the head of the Productivity Commission, and she recommended, in order for the baby boomers, an intergenerational transfer tax of 20%. Above $500,000. Do you think that the next generation, the millennials and all that, who will be politicians, will start to look at that scope?
That's already happening. I do get very frustrated by people in French restaurants in Canberra over red wine deciding how your savings are going to be spent because they've never been out there and built a business. They've been on salaries their entire life, so they don't really have that kind of... And their jobs are political, not economic. So the idea that this generation is going to pay away part of their hard-earned money for somebody else, I think, is incredibly frustrating and slightly worrying. The other way to think about that is the stuff that they're talking about in climate change and the taxes they want to put in that space because it is passing the cost. I was at a meeting, and this sounds impossibly wanky, with Simon Jones, who is the Financial Services Minister. Jim Chalmers and Albo didn't really attend. He said he was, but he didn't. And they were talking about the change on the HECS debt. Does everyone know about this? Where they're going to... Yeah, so we're going to wipe off the HECS debt. And I'm like, well, you're not. You're just passing the bill to somebody else. So that you can't... Money is like physics. Once it's created, it can't be destroyed. It can be transformed into someone else. You own the debt. Now you're passing it to the rest of Australians. If you think they're signed up for that and they understand that, then go nuts. But if they haven't signed up to it and they do understand it, they're going to find you impossibly unpopular because you keep getting them to pay for things. And I've got something really shitty to say. If you're successful enough in business and driven enough in business to be in this room today, then it's coming from us. And I don't mind paying tax. I mean, you shouldn't brag about how much tax you pay, but I paid a lot, and I'm happy to do it. But when it starts to be spent really badly, I'm a bit like Kerry Packer on this one. If you think they know what to do with it, then give them more, because there's no evidence that they do. And that's a bit worrying. A bit government bashy, I'm sorry, but a bit frustrating.
Perfect. Any other questions before Andrew? No? Guys, thank you so much. Can everyone please thank Andrew? That was a great session, mate. Thank you. Okay. What we're going to do for you today, because I can see the room, everyone thinks everyone needs to go bathroom, get some coffee and that, but just hold on, just a couple of things. Make sure you hashtag, make sure you see the sponsors. Go see the We Love Marketing booth, because you saw Simon earlier. It's all about marketing your energy. And I'm telling you, I look at accountants' websites all the time. Get a scorecard on this. The girls will give you free tips what you can do for your business if you get mass distribution. We're going to come back here at 11:45. Mark Boris just turned up here. We have $1 billion on stage. So we're going to have Mark, Simon back. If Andrew's around, and we want to get back him, and we'll have MJ on stage. I think it's going to be the best panel for accountants you'll ever see. But just because we are finishing early, the food and the drinks won't be out for another 10 minutes, but go to the bathroom, see the sponsors, but it'll be around the bar area where the sponsors are. But guys, thank you for the first session. It was great. Thank you.